Evaluation of public school teacher performance is a matter for local control.
State and federal standards to evaluate teacher performance are necessary.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingartner, filling in for Jerry Lutz during this COVID edition of the American Religious Town Hall. Our panelists are here, and we'd like for you to be introduced to them. And so we'll begin on my right with Michael.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel of Boca Raton, Florida.
And I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I serve at First Christian Church, Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I am canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
We have an interesting topic today about education, and we're looking forward to hearing our panelists' opinions. And so let's begin with a statement. Many battles are waged over public schools these days. Private school vouchers, charter schools, various school choice plans, standardized testing, reading methodology, textbook content, and funding priorities, not to mention the issues surrounding education during the pandemic. All of these create heated arguments from parent-teacher associations to churches and synagogues to state legislatures. One such debate has been over the evaluation of teachers. In previous generations, teachers were evaluated by principals and superintendents whose performance then was a matter for the local school board, which was in turn responsible to the public through elections. But by the turn of the last century, a new process was instituted, giving more state and federal control. The new process was to measure teacher quality by the standardized test scores of their students. The methodology was developed by an agricultural statistician who believed that the same process used to evaluate cows could be used to evaluate the teachers of children. This idea to measure value added worth of an educator. The idea has become the most commonly used practice to evaluate teachers. New studies show that these have not improved teaching and learning in U.S. schools. Neither student achievement nor teacher effectiveness, nor graduation rates, nor teacher retention rates have improved. Former Assistant Secretary of Education Diane Ravitch calls it all ineffective, inaccurate, and demoralizing. Teachers' associations and unions agree, arguing that teachers are rewarded for teaching to the test and that the teacher creativity and mentoring of young teachers by older ones is stifled. Yet, with billions of tax dollars at stake in the testing industry alone, not to mention the future of our children's lives, teachers continue to be evaluated largely on the basis of value-added method for evaluating the worth of cows. Number one question, what is the best way to evaluate teachers in public schools? Question two, do business models translate to the public school classroom? And three, with billions of dollars at stake in the funding of public education, how do we as a society balance local control versus state and national control? Important questions, and questions that have some bearing on us today and our children. So let's now turn to Tom for his comments.
Thank you. First, let me begin by saying that I am an advocate of public education from beginning to end. I'm a product of public schools, and we sent our sons to public schools, and I believe in public education. And the reason I take time to say that is that there have been too many who have been running down our public schools. There are just countless communities in this nation where the public schools are the primary educator, the primary employer in the entire community, the leading employer in the entire community. And the schools do not deserve some of the things that are said of them. And our teachers need to be supported and encouraged and affirmed. And one of the things that teachers generally complain about, and one of the things that I think is so much of a grind in their lives, is the habit that we've gotten into of evaluating them on the basis of what somebody else does. Not on the basis of what they do, but on the basis of what someone else does. And this is primarily through the ever-present standardized tests. Now, when I was in school way back, there was standardized testing, but we took maybe one standardized test every other year, something like that. On average, over the 12 years of my primary and secondary education, probably less than that. In fact, almost certainly less than that. Now, it is a huge industry that dominates our state legislatures and dominates our state education associations and dominates all forms of the educational process. And one of the most problematic ways in which that domination is seen is in the evaluation of teachers. The standardized tests are not designed to evaluate teachers. They're designed to evaluate students, and yet they are used to evaluate teachers. Standardized tests are biased socioeconomically and racially. Standardized tests are inequitable to many subject areas. How do you by your standardized test measure the quality of the chorus teacher in your school or of the art teacher in your school? There are some things that might be on those standardized tests that could be reflective of things that students would learn in those subject areas, but largely not. And standardized tests, by the way, cost states billions of dollars, which are dollars that don't have to be spent, that could be spent on other forms of improvement of the schools. So, you know, I think that there are lots of creative ways that principals and other supervisors of faculty members on local campuses can do the job of evaluating teachers. We don't need to do it in the way that we're doing it now. Yes, there might be some broad federal or state standards, but the evaluation itself needs to be done at the local level.
Thank you, Tom. Bishop?
Thank you. Even though as a bishop, I have a diocese which has a Catholic school system, still I have a lot of people, Catholics who serve as teachers in public schools, locally in students who attend public schools, and there's a vested common good, a vested contribution to the common good in public education. I would agree that the problems that we see now of teaching to the test have caused a lot of problems and more problems societally. It has not improved education as a rule. I think that the federal involvement or the state involvement really should be the setting of benchmarks, a universal benchmark. How those are measured are going to be contingent on the local community as well. So there has to be a balance with some sort of universal key to solidarity and then also subsidiarity. I think the federal government got involved in education more intensely when evaluations and assessments of teachers weren't being done, as well as teacher formation. And oftentimes, some of this was brought on by problems with the teachers' unions, who didn't take responsibility in many cases for the integrity of their profession and assessing themselves as peers, but took on the business model of management versus labor, though there is an absolute right to be a part of a union as well. But I think in the moderator's statement and in the talk, what's been missing is one important and essential contributor to education, and that are parents. Parents are the primary educators of their children. And too often, I think, society has placed an extra expectation on teachers to do so much of the responsibility of parenting. I think the recent experience we've had during pandemic and online education, parents have also maybe had a greater appreciation for what teachers go through, and also the gift of and responsibility of teaching and doing it well, but also perhaps an awareness of what's being taught in school, and hopefully a sense of the responsibility that they have as parents in educating, which I think most parents do take very seriously. So I think there's really, besides the students themselves, albeit as minors, there's the responsibility of parents to see to the education of their children and being involved in it, that of teachers and administrators in schools, and then also perhaps in general oversight for benchmarks as well at a federal and state level for some sort of universal level of accountability.
Thanks. Rabbi Levin?
So I think we can't underestimate the importance of our public schools. They are the great equalizer. They are the path to prosperity and opportunity that is presented to any child in America if they have the opportunity to go to a good public school where they have teachers that will inspire them and nurture them and teach them how to think and how to learn. And I really do believe that the emphasis on these standardized tests is squashing the love of learning from our kids, because they learn that the important thing is how to fill in the bubbles on the test, not to love learning. And that I do believe it's also been very, very oppressive on teachers who realize that their livelihoods or their employment is based not on their performance, but on their children's performance. And the fact is that you cannot necessarily paint student performance with a broad brush. My sister is a math teacher. She has a PhD in math education. She knows what she's doing. She taught for years on the Pima Maricopa Indian Reservation outside of Phoenix. How do you judge the students in that school on the basis of comparison to the Scottsdale students, where on the Indian Reservation where she lived, and where she taught, I should say, if the students came to school on a regular basis, that was a pretty good accomplishment, because there's so much skepticism about state institutions amongst that cultural community as opposed to people from a different socioeconomic background. And I think that there ought not be tolerance for poor teachers. And I think that exactly as Bishop Olson said, that the federal government can set standards and guidelines and can create the data gathering so that we learn what's working and what's not working. But I know that in my own institution, when I have to do evaluations of the people that I work with, I don't fill in numbers. I write a narrative. And I get to know that individual, and I try to talk about the things they're doing well and how to coach them on to do things better. And I think that that's the proper way for a local principal who knows the staff to best evaluate their faculty.
Great, thank you. Cannon?
Yes. I must say that I found it quite incredible, or unbelievable maybe, that teachers are being evaluated by using the same process as is used by evaluating cows. And I actually thought that this was a joke until our dear moderator was that he was playing this joke on us. But as I did my homework for this program, I discovered it was no joke, and that VAM, the value added modeling, has become a commonly used tool for evaluating teachers. I can also say that this evaluation, this process, has come under severe criticism and attack by teachers' unions. I cannot speak about public schools in the way in which some of you have been able to speak, because our daughters both went to public school in England, and they were not here at the time that they would normally be in high school. So I cannot be critical from that perspective. But certainly something that Dan has just said is really important. Today, wealthy students who come from prosperous homes, who have economic means, have a far greater advantage in testing than a student that comes from an Indian reservation or a situation like that. And we can just see what goes on now in preparation for college board exams, and the types of money that is being spent simply to be able to get the student to be able to get into college with high scores and those types of exams. And the same thing is happening in high schools. And so therefore, you know, even the preparation for the exam is not really fair, because people are being prompted, paid for, and being able to get high scores in their exams. And so those exams are really skewed in relationship to what the teacher's teaching ability is. And frequently, teachers are penalized because of those types of economic factors that are involved. Every single educational system, Educational Testing Services, RAND, of the board, National Board of Testing and Assessment of the National Research Council of National Academy of Sciences, they all state this is a bad way of doing it. Every one of them.
I think one of the problems with it is it confuses learning with knowing. All right, and I think part of primary education, if you will, or elementary education, I'm dating myself perhaps in that, but nonetheless have led to it, is that you learn how to learn. All right, and you learn how to learn not just simply how to answer questions that are expected on a test. And I think in each student, each person learns differently. Some more strongly through auditory learning, some through visual learning, or both, or a combination of both. Plus, there's also their experience at home. And I think the best teachers are able to meet a student where they're at. And I think there's a reciprocal relationship. You know, in other words, that if the student's not learning, you're not teaching. You know, you may be in front of a class, but the best teachers we've had are those teachers that have never forgotten their students first, and they love learning, so they love teaching.
Great, Tom.
Yeah, I think we need the best teachers in the places where they're needed the most, not in the places where they're needed the least. Yes. You know, I think we need the best teacher on the teachers on the Indian reservation. I think we need the best teachers in that school, in that part of the city where some folks might not want to go in the middle of the night. I think we need the best teachers in places where kids might not be making the best grades, because that's where we need the people who really have the ability to change that learning model that the child is using, and to find a way to meet each child's needs. And there's no standardized test that measures that.
Sounds like we're nearly unanimous. We're going to go to a break and we'll come right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. We're having a great discussion about teacher education, teacher testing, and we're going to wrap it up now with each of our panelists giving a closing thought. And we begin with the bishop on my right.
Accountability is a key word when it comes to education because it involves the well-being of our children and how they develop as human beings to be happy, healthy, and whole adults. This requires some basic benchmarks that are universally shared, but it just as much involves the role of parents in seeing to the education of their children at home, and also the assessment and encouragement of teachers who understand each individual student and their mission and vocation at hand, which is beyond just simply the conveyance of information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me encourage all of you out there, if you want to know how the teachers in your public schools are doing, go sit in a classroom. You will be amazed. You will be excited. I think, and oh, by the way, it would be very helpful if you would volunteer to help them in those classrooms. But you don't have to do that. Go in and sit for a day. In fact, to me, that's the best way for a principal, for a superintendent of schools, for an area supervisor of a subject area, to evaluate the teachers under her or his supervision, is to go in the classroom. And oh, by the way, that's what those people do, because they've been in the classroom and they know what it looks like. They know what good teaching methodology is. They know what the subject area requires, and that's why they go and sit and listen to what the teacher is doing.
Amazing. John?
Yes, I'm really concerned about this subject simply because much of what we've been speaking about today is an ideal situation. And one of the problems is that many children who are in our schools today do not come from ideal situations. And much of it comes out of poverty and parents who simply, they would love to be home, but they economically cannot be home. They have to be working, two parents working as much as possible, if there are even two parents in the family. And so I think that we have to be very careful in relationship to, making decisions in relationship to these situations without knowing the situation itself. And there are other influences as well besides family resources, but it is also the student health, family mobility, influence of neighborhood peers and classmates who may be relatively more or less advantaged. So all these factors have to be played into this. And so we have to be very careful in relationship to how we evaluate, and particularly for teachers to be, I bet most of the best teachers are working in these very difficult situations. and who will never get any credit simply because of the situation in which they find themselves today.
Dan?
I live about 10, 15 minutes from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. High school that up until a few years ago was an anonymous high school in a suburban community. How do you evaluate the teachers at that high school?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you evaluate them based on how their students perform? The teachers at that high school were heroic. I had the honor and privilege of being at the funeral of one of the teachers who literally threw himself in front of a door to save the life of his students when a gunman opened fire in his school, stood in the doorway to protect his students. The way that those teachers ought to be evaluated is not on the basis of whether students attained a particular mark on the FCAT. Those teachers should be evaluated on the basis of, did they make their students feel safe to be in a building again? Did they make their students feel loved? Did they teach them how to think? Did they teach them how to heal? I think about some of the times when my teachers, in my own experience, were the ones that left the curriculum and talked about what was going on in the world with us and taught us how to evaluate it, how to think about it, how to approach it. I think about all the students in our community who left school time and again in those fractious times where they learned about civil process, where they drove 8 hours in the car to Tallahassee to tell their lawmakers about what they needed in their schools to feel safe. That kind of education is often far more important than what they're getting in science class that day, which doesn't mean that they don't need to perform. They do need to perform, and there are bad teachers out there. I have a parent in my congregation who was telling me about how a parent of a teacher in her kid's class went AWOL after COVID and never taught the kids again. Teacher evaluation is serious, but it needs to be handled intimately and appropriately based on the context of that individual school.
Thank you. I think that your comments resonate with all of us, that management is hard. And when management is not trusted, then the federal government comes in and wants to make standards. And in this case, I think unanimously they're ineffective. So thank you so much for your comments, all of you. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. May the God of all of us bless all of you.